All right, Monday, June 10th, Black and Gold Breakdown, a breaking news edition of Black and Gold Breakdown. Jared Bailey, USA Today, with you as always, joined by my friend Aaron Becker from Yard Barker. Yeah, buddy, Mike Tomlin gets extended. He's here for at least 3 more seasons through the 2027 season. This is something that I think just about every Steelers, beat writer, reporter, fan expected to come at some point, but now we it's official. It is here. Mike Tomlin extended through the 2027 season. How are we feeling just off the rip?
Yeah, I mean, probably the least surprising news of the offseason so far, right? I mean, I know there's been a lot of criticism gone to Mike Tomlin's way over the last couple of years, not winning a playoff game since the 2016 season. But listen, he's been one of the most consistent head coaches in the league. He hasn't had a losing season. I know that only takes so far. You got to win a game in January here at some point, but it's deserving. He's a top 5 head coach in the league, and the Steelers are smart to lock him up for the next few years here.
Yeah, and I think that you kind of hit the the nail on the head. Like, respectfully, please win now. Like, it's been quite a while since there's been a game, since the Steelers have won a game that's mattered. It goes back to, it's been 8 years now at this point, and there's been a lot of disappointing losses, between now and then, and even, leading up to then, where, you have, even going back to 2011, the loss to Tim Tebow against the Broncos in Denver. There's been, the loss to the Jaguars and Blake Bortles at home. So now it's been 8 years since the franchise's last playoff victory. It's been a long time since they've been to an AFC Championship game. And obviously there's, a few different factors that go into that. Ben Roethlisberger was on the tail end of his career. Kenny Pickett wasn't good. Neither was Matt Canada. But on the flip side of that, I'm sure Mike Tomlin had a nice amount of say of drafting Kenny Pickett. Mike Tomlin had a lot of say in keeping Matt Canada around for as long as he did. So for as consistent as he's been, and for as good of a coach as he's been and still is, he's not perfect. But when you have guys like, these new acquisitions, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Patrick Queen, all making a point to say, Mike Tomlin was a big reason why I wanted to come here. That's not a small thing.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I mean, when you look at Mike Tomlin's track record here, he has been an X factor in recruiting guys coming to Pittsburgh. And, maybe they wouldn't be able to land a guy like Patrick Queen or Russell Wilson, right? I mean, if the Steelers didn't have him at the helm. And so I think he's been a really big factor in that, and that can't be overlooked. And there's value in that, paying him that money and to be the head coach. He brings that to the team. And, you talk about the losses, right? The Steelers have suffered in the playoffs last however many years it's been. And, it isn't pretty, but you also kind of have to look at the games they have won that they maybe shouldn't have. Look at last season. It wasn't a playoff game that they won, but they made it to the playoffs with Kenny Pickett and Mitchell Trubisky and Mason Rudolph combining for 13 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. I mean, those aren't great numbers. And you bring in a guy like Russell Wilson, like we just talked about, maybe you wouldn't be able to do that if you had Mike Tomlin. And he had double the amount of touchdowns, 26 last year, and less interceptions, 8. And so you think you upgrade a massive and very important position like that, thanks to Tomlin potentially, and maybe you got something here. Maybe Russell Wilson isn't the guy. Maybe Justin Fields isn't the guy. But you look at all the best teams in the league, and the best teams, they have the quarterback and they got the head coach. And I think the Steelers are comfortable in saying that they have the head coach. I mean, he's won a Super Bowl, right? And it's tough to find a guy with that resume. And yeah, he hasn't done it in a minute, but the Steelers can figure out this quarterback position. I don't think it's far-fetched to say the Steelers have one of the most complete rosters in the league. I mean, maybe outside of the number 2 receiver position. I don't know what other holes this team has.
Yeah, like you said, it's still up in the air in terms of the quarterback position. We'll see how Russell Wilson and or Justin Fields perform this year. And the thing with Tomlin is that, it's very, especially with this fan base, it's either one end of the spectrum or the other. Like, there is no in between on feelings about Mike Tomlin. You either love him or you want him gone. And he's very polarizing to Steelers fans. And look, last year, after the consecutive losses to Arizona and New England, I think that was probably the peak of, all right, man, like, this thing should probably end. And then, of course, the Steelers being the Steelers and Tomlin being Tomlin, they win. They win their last 3 games, get into the playoffs with Mason Rudolph, And, despite what the score may have been against Buffalo, I didn't go into that game expecting them to win, but credit to Mason Rudolph and the Steelers as a whole for fighting back when they were down 3 scores and making it competitive before ultimately Buffalo was just too much to handle. But as I've said, I think that the biggest thing now, and Tomlin himself even said it in the statement that was released via the team, is like, now we have to, really focus on getting back to winning in January, winning the playoffs, and having sustainable success. And, you look at the roster right now, if the quarterback play is even just slightly below average, like the bar is low. If they can just get adequate quarterback play, there's no reason to say they can't win at least a playoff game.
Yeah, and I think, Art Rooney isn't extending Mike Tomlin without there still being pressure on him, right? There's still pressure for him to go win in the playoffs here. Art Rooney said it earlier this offseason that there is urgency there,
Yeah.
So don't take this Tomlin extension as, hey, if this guy goes out here and he doesn't win any playoff games for the next 4 years, like his job is safe again. I don't think that's the thing that's happening here. Rooney said it this offseason. And Tomlin knows it. There's urgency in that building. Look at all the moves they made in free agency. I mean, Omar Khan's been very active the last 2 years.
Yeah.
This team wants to win now. I think those moves say that. And, Tomlin getting this extension is a big move for the team, but it doesn't make it any less urgent for this team to win in the postseason.
Yeah, and I think that Omar Khan, more or less, is kind of an extension of Mike Tomlin in the way that they want to go about building this team. Whereas Kevin Colbert was very just too old school. Didn't make a ton of big moves during free agency. If any big moves during free agency, was very much, okay, we'll build through the draft and go from there. But that way of thinking is just, you're not going to win games. You're not going to win games of importance in today's NFL with that way of thinking. Look at what the Rams did. They basically said, yeah, to hell with the draft. We're going to trade for dudes that we know are good, and they won a Super Bowl doing it. Not to say that that's the only way that you can build teams now, but you got to be active and you got to be willing to spend money on good players to be able, to take that step forward. And Pittsburgh did it this season. They gave Patrick Queen the largest external deal in the history of the team. They bring in Russell Wilson. They trade for Justin Fields. Like, dude, when's the last time, if in any of our lifetimes, where we went into an offseason saying, the Steelers are going to make 4 trades. They're going to sign a few big name dudes, and they're going to really turn this thing around. They traded away Deontay Johnson. They traded away Kenny Pickett. They traded for Justin Fields, signed Patrick Queen, signed Deshaun Elliott. They probably still aren't done in terms of receivers and potential other defensive names. They bring back Cam Sutton. Like, they've been very active. You brought up the urgency. It's very clear that they feel the urgency and like, hey, we haven't won a playoff game in a while. We need to change something.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you asked the average fan going into this offseason what the most likely scenario was going to happen at quarterback, keep Kenny Pickett, maybe go get Russ or trade for Justin Fields, you'd choose maybe one of those to happen, right?
Right.
And Omar Khan goes out here and he does all 3, and so like you said too, Patrick Queen receiving the biggest free agent contract in franchise history. Like, these are big moves. They're changing the way the organization operates. And yeah, I mean, this team's trying to win now. I mean, they're changing the way they do things, and they're not just sitting on their hands and being like, hey, we'll make a couple moves and see if it makes a big difference. No, they're saying, hey, we went 10-7 last year. We made the playoffs, which was great, right? But that's not what we're trying to do anymore. We're trying to make noise in the playoffs, and making all these moves and being as active they have been in the offseason. I think it definitely hints that that's what they're trying to do. And I mean, we'll see if it actually plays out that way, but they're not sitting on their hands anymore. And this is not your father's Steelers, if you will. So
yes, very much. And by the way, I think we have Mike Tomlin's burner account in the YouTube chat right now. Great move on the team from Mike T. And then the continued comment: Coach can't throw the ball and play defense. All he can do is coach and wait. Yeah, and that's the thing too, man. Like, we know how horrible this offense has been over the past several seasons, where if opposing teams scored more than 20 points, you knew that they weren't going to win. And if you look at their record in games where their opponents scored 21 or more points, the only game that they won last year where opponents scored more than 21 points with Kenny Pickett at the helm was against Cleveland, and the defense scored more points than the offense did. So like, it was not good. And it's clear that they feel that urgency right now. We'll get to a few more comments here. Best thing about the Steelers in recent years, model stability. Yeah, we kind of touched on that too, is, the stability, the continuation, the carryover. That's something that can't be understated in terms of Pittsburgh. And in today's NFL, that might be a little bit forgotten about, because teams are quick to move on from quarterbacks and move on from head coaches if they don't see success right away, and understandably so in a lot of cases. But for the Steelers, I mean, to be as always in the playoff picture, at least hovering around it, and several years where everybody's like, oh man, this could be the year that they fall off, and then they win 10 games, get into the wild card spot. Like, yes, this playoff slump is noteworthy and it needs to end, but there is something to say for, hey, any other coach probably doesn't get them even into the playoffs in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the NFL is a very "what have you done for me lately" league, right?
Yeah.
And so I get the criticism that head coach Mike Tomlin has received, but there is something to be said about having 3 head coaches in the last 50 plus years. I mean, having that stability does go a long way. I mean, talk with some of the players that have been with some of these teams that have seen a ton of head coach change over the last 10, 20 years. I mean, look at Cleveland, who's in the division. They've had how many head coaches? I mean, the Panthers, I mean, the amount of head coach turnover that there is every offseason. I mean, having that stability goes a long way when developing a team, because when you're building a Super Bowl team, it is not an overnight process. It is not a 1-year thing. And so when you have a head coach that's in there and he's creating that culture, it goes a long way. And that just is what it is at the end of the day. And, with these teams bringing in head coaches and expecting instant results, that's just not realistic in this league. And having that stability goes a long way. And the Steelers are locking that up for a reason.
And a lot of people's arguments against Tomlin, especially early on, was, oh, he inherited Bill Cowher's team. And sure, he inherited a good team that had just won the Super Bowl 2 years prior. But the season prior to Tomlin taking over, was an 8-8 team that did not make the playoffs. He got them into the playoffs his first year as head coach, won the Super Bowl his second year as head coach, drafted and elevated a lot of the players that really made that team. He drafted Lamar Woodley, drafted Lawrence Timmons, elevated James Harrison. Like, a lot of the guys on that defense, especially the pass rush, were Mike Tomlin guys. So I've never really loved that, type of attitude towards him. But, as I've said, there are clear deficiencies with Tomlin, and it has felt to me at times like the game was passing him by, especially with, the past few years, where their style of winning, it was very clear that wasn't sustainable, against good teams. Like, sure, if you want to play around and let Will Levis in his first career start hang around on Thursday night, cool. You could probably win those games. Do it against Josh Allen, though. We see what happens. Do it against C.J. Stroud. You quickly found out what happens. So against mediocre to bad teams, you can win that way. But against good teams with great quarterbacks, I mean, they found out in their past, 5 playoff appearances that you can't win that way. And that is my biggest qualm with the Steelers as of late, is they try to be a throwback team in a league where throwback football is dead.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be even the biggest question going into this season. Yeah, you make a big change at offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, but I still think this team wants to run the football early and often. And,
sure,
I don't think that mindset has really changed a ton. You rebuild the offensive line. You have a great running back duo, Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. And I think that's what they're going to do. I mean, Russell Wilson is most likely not going to be the Russell Wilson of Seattle playing backyard football, and Justin Fields, we'll see how much of a battle that is there. I think Russ has the pole position, like they keep saying, and I would be surprised if he's not the starter week 1. But, putting Justin out there, he's had some turnover issues, some taking sack issues, so they're not going to rush him out there. I think they want to play a physical style play of offense, running the football and, working the play action pass game off of that. And they're going to ask Russ hey, can you throw more than 13 touchdowns than what we had last year? But their big thing is don't turn the football over. That's been their mantra for a really long time. They think this defense is going to be a top 5 defense. It was already star-studded. You had a bunch of more stars this offseason, and we'll see what it looks like.
Yeah, I agree. We'll get to a few more comments here. Context for every loss was major injuries to key players like the 2015 Broncos, no Bell, AB, D'Angelo Williams, Ben with the bad throwing shoulder. Yeah, they still won 75% of that game. So Fitzgerald Toussaint's fumble. Oh man, I forgot about that game. That's one of those playoff losses that like I kind of let escape my mind. Yeah, they had that game in hand until that late fumble, and then Peyton Manning did Peyton Manning things. That was unfortunate.
Yeah, that was definitely an unfortunate loss there.
I totally forgot about that. Thank you for that PTSD. I think a coach G always keeping the team competitive regardless of insane numbers of injuries and bogus officiating. I never like to, blame officials for games and whatnot, but yeah, the roster has been subpar in recent memory, and they're still remaining competitive. Being competitive with Kenny is a testament to, and also the fact that in 2019 when they were 8-5 at one point with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph running the show. After starting 1-4, somehow rattling off like winning 5 of their next 6. Now, the fact that they were 8-5 and lost out, that was pretty disappointing. But again, it was only a matter of time before that offense just bit you in the ass too many times where you just couldn't recover. There's been a lot of seasons in the past, handful of years where Mike Tomlin has really, even if it didn't result in playoff wins or a playoff berth even in 2019, really flexing the fact that he's a special coach.
Yeah, I mean, that 2019 season, I know they didn't make the playoffs, but I mean, was that a more impressive season with Mike Tomlin than even this last one with Kenny Pickett,
I think so.
Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph? Like, I mean, Duck Hodges, he's not in the league anymore. Mason Rudolph, I mean, he might receive some starter snaps up down there in Tennessee, but I mean, he's still a guy that needs to become more consistent on a longer term basis. He looked great down the stretch for the Steelers, but when you look back at that 2019 season, the Steelers weren't working with very much compared to this last season. So yeah, I mean, those 2 seasons are definitely testaments to Coach T's winning streak, if you will, and why they probably kept him around. They think this is a better overall team, and they're like, hey, if Mike T can get us to the playoffs or right on the cusp of them with those teams, what can we do with this year's team? So
yeah, and that's another thing too, because like this is another year where like Vegas odds are low and the Steelers like over under win totals at 7.5 the last time I checked. I can't imagine this team somehow being worse with a better quarterbacks, multiple there, a better offensive line, a better offensive coordinator, a defense that was already good that got better. They won 10 games last year and they were a dumpster fire on offense. I just can't see them somehow being worse when they once again are playing a third place schedule, the same that they did last year. I can't see them being worse with all of the new pieces that they've added and getting better all over the field.
Yeah, I really don't understand the arguments of the Steelers having their first losing season this year. Listen, if it happens, okay. I don't want to be on that side of the argument, though, right? It's like fighting against Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady, winning the Super Bowl. It just happens, And Mike Tomlin, he hasn't had a losing season in 17 years. Why would this year be any different? I mean, like we just covered the 2019 season last year. The teams weren't super competitive, and yet he comes out here with these winning records, and you look at these offseason moves, and the Steelers upgraded at a ton of positions, quarterback, offensive line, I mean, defensive line depth, if you will, inside linebacker, corner, safety. I mean, I think the signing of safety Deshaun Elliott is incredibly underrated. He's going to allow Minkah Fitzpatrick to play over the middle and that instinctual type football that made him an all-pro a couple of years ago. Getting that type of Minkah Fitzpatrick back in your defense is going to make waves already on that side of the ball when you were already very good unit. This could be a special one this year for sure.
Yeah, Minkah's coming off the first year in his career where he didn't register an interception. So obviously a lot that he's playing for in terms of a bounce back year. Missed a lot of time with injuries and everything. And I've said it multiple times throughout this offseason. Like, obviously, if you can get a Patrick Queen, that makes your defense immensely better. If you can get a starting caliber safety like Deshaun Elliott, it makes your defense better. But I think that there was a larger plan in mind with these signings, and it was to take some of the hats off of Minkah Fitzpatrick so he could just go back to being a ball hawk in center field where, okay, rather than have him, come up in the box and help in coverage, okay, you got Patrick Queen and Peyton Wilson now to do that at the linebacker spot. And instead of having him jump up and run coverage as a safety, you got Deshaun Elliott to do that now. So I think that there was a larger plan in mind when it came to some of these signings.
Yeah, I mean, and you look at the big picture of this thing. Why have they been able to make all of these signings and upgrade all these positions? Well, it's because they're paying very little money to that quarterback room.
Yeah.
And it comes back to Mike Tomlin, right? He was able to recruit Russell Wilson to play on the vet minimum, $1.2 million. I mean, this is a once in a 10 to 15-year opportunity the Steelers had. And Mike Tomlin was able to get Russell Wilson to come to Pittsburgh. And because he was able to do that and sign on that vet minimum deal, they've been able to add all these guys, Patrick Queen, Deshaun Elliott, so-and-so. I mean, trading for Dante Jackson. I mean, these are going to be key contributors on that side of the football this year. And like I said, I think this can be a special unit. Only time will tell. There's a lot of new faces. They're going to have to take time to gel. But it all comes back to Mike Tomlin recruiting these guys, getting them at the price they're getting them at. And we'll see what this 2024 Steelers looks like.
What does this next three to four season stretch, what does success look like in terms, what would your definition of success be, from now until the end of 2027? Like, what's the threshold to say, okay, that was a good extension. That was a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, over the next 4 years, you hope to win a Super Bowl. We'll
Sure.
see if that happens. I think this year specifically, you got to win that playoff game, right? I mean, everyone's breathing down the organization's throat. That needs to get done. You guys upgraded the quarterback position, a bunch of other positions. You locked down Mike Tomlin for the long haul here, and so I think you got to. Success would be winning a playoff game, maybe two this year. Make some waves in the playoffs. You haven't done that since the 2016 season. Then you look past this season. You got to see if Russell Wilson or Justin Fields is the guy, right? And if one of them is, great. You lock them up for 3-4 years, maybe a similar deal that Baker Mayfield kind of received this off season. And, continue to build around them and add more pieces. Like I said, I think this team is already an underrated roster, pretty complete. Like I said, outside the number 2 wide receiver position, which they could still add this offseason. I think they would like to. It's a complete roster. So you win a playoff game or two this year, figure out who that quarterback is, and then continue to build up with it the next couple of years and maybe get that Super Bowl you've been looking for. It's been a while, and this fan base is hungry for another championship. We'll see. But getting that playoff win or two this year, locking up that quarterback, that's the big success for this year for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And in terms of the teams that like I would feel the most comfortable with them going against, like I don't think they're going to win the division. I think the Bengals, if they're healthy, are going to win the division. But let's say that Baltimore does. Like if the Steelers face the Ravens in the wild card round, I have the utmost confidence that that will be the team that they end the drought against, because they've won 7 of the last 8 against Baltimore.
Right.
They haven't lost in Baltimore since 2019. And even then, the game that they lost was Duck Hodges against Robert Griffin III. So you have to go back even further to find the last time they lost like a real game between 2 real quarterbacks in Baltimore. So that would give me the utmost confidence if they face the Ravens in the wild card round in terms of ending the playoff drought. I think that oddly enough, that's the team I would feel the most confident in amongst actual playoff contenders.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the AFC North is probably unarguably the most difficult division in football.
Right.
But yet again, it's another testament to Tomlin. His record in it has been incredible. Like you said, the Steelers have won 7 of the last 8 against the Ravens, which is, quote unquote, the most physical, fierce rivalry in all of football. The Steelers have been on the winning end of that a lot lately. And then you have Joe Burrow coming off the injury. You have Deshaun Watson coming off the injury. I expect all 4 of these teams to be in contention for the playoffs this year.
Yeah.
It's very unlikely all of them are going to make it. But the Steelers have as good a shot as anyone, and I think Mike Tomlin is a big reason why.
If they win the division this year, that would be very, very nice, especially like hosting a playoff game. The last time they hosted a playoff game, when the hell was it? Was it the Bortles loss? It might have been the Bortles loss.
Yeah, probably.
It's been a long time. It's been a very long time since they've hosted a playoff game. Again, I still think that Cincinnati is, when completely healthy, the best team in the division, just because they have the best quarterback in the division. They have the best receiver in the division, good head coach in Zach Taylor, a defense that got a little bit better this offseason. So I'm not expecting a division win for Pittsburgh, but I do think that 10-11 wins is on the table.
Yeah. I think a realistic expectation would be a 6-7 seed wild card spot, right? I agree. I don't expect the Steelers to win the division. I would leave that up to the Bengals or Ravens. I mean, look what the Ravens did that last year. I don't think you can overlook that. They had the league's best record in the regular season, 13-4. They made it to the AFC Championship game and came up 7 points shy against the eventual Super Bowl champion Chiefs. I mean, yeah, they lost a lot of key players on the offensive line and a couple key defenders, like Patrick Queen.
Sure.
Steelers stealing him away from them. Geno Stone had the second most interceptions in the league. Cincinnati stole him from them. But that's still a really good team. They draft really well. I mean, I think them not being able to pay everyone is a testament to them drafting well, right? When you draft that well, you just simply can't pay everyone.
Right.
When you're a good team like that, your guys want to get paid. But I think you can't overlook them. 2-time MVP Lamar Jackson, still one of the most difficult players to stop in all of football. So yeah, Ravens, Bengals, winning the AFC North, not a hard thing to see happening. But the Steelers being a wild card team, and if they meet one of those in the playoffs, I don't think it's out of the question that they get that win. So
I agree. John says Bengals are the only team to beat KC in the playoffs the last few years, and both teams know it. I think they will have the best chance barring injuries. I agree with that, and that's the thing. Like, I know a lot of people are like pointing at Joe Burrow and saying, "Oh, you're injury prone," but like, okay, he had the ACL injury his rookie year. Few years in between these last injuries, and there were just like freak things that happened. Like, he was just walking on the field and hurt his calf, and then with the wrist, I mean, it banged off a Ravens player's helmet and really messed it up. So
right.
I don't necessarily think he's injury prone. I would be more concerned about Lamar Jackson finishing a season than I would be Joe Burrow at this point, just because we've seen Lamar, not be able to finish consecutive seasons before 2023. So that's something that I, tend to keep an eye on when it comes to Baltimore, especially because like apparently he's slimming down, which makes zero sense to me. Like I would think that a quarterback would try to bulk up to be able to take more hits rather than get down to 205 pounds and get ragdolled every time you get hit. Just my opinion. I don't necessarily get that. Steeler Way says first time catching the live. Appreciate you watching. I think that we both agree that it would be very shocking if the Browns win the division. I think that would be the most shocking out of all of them, simply because like I love their defense, love Jim Schwartz as defensive coordinator. I think Deshaun Watson stinks. I just don't see that him getting any better 4 years after the last year that he was good.
Yeah, and I mean, if you want to talk about injury concerns, that's the team you got to look at, right? I mean, Deshaun Watson's played 12 games since he joined Cleveland in 2022, and yeah, a portion of that was because of his suspension, but he really hasn't been able to return to that 2020 form when he led the league in passing yards with the Texans. You have Nick Chubb, who, he's one of the best running backs when healthy, but he's coming off yet another serious knee injury, the same knee he suffered in college. So there's some big question marks there. They add Jerry Jeudy. What is Jerry Jeudy, right? He's had some big seasons, but his career's been pretty up and down so far, but they gave him a deal. They think he could be a good complement to Amari Cooper. And yeah, that defense should come back and be a dominant unit once again. But, like we saw last year, you face a young talented team like the Texans, and they put up 45 points on them still. That was not a pretty game for Cleveland. And it comes down to the fact that you still got to have that quarterback and that offense to be able to put up points at the end of the day if you want to win meaningful games in January.
Yeah. And like when it comes to Cleveland, like the rivalry with Pittsburgh, I do think is somewhat back. Last season they split the season series. It's been a very even season series since 2020. I think that in terms of when the Steelers do play them, I wouldn't be shocked if they split. But in terms of Cleveland, somehow figuring things out and winning the division with Deshaun Watson, I just think that that's the biggest long shot in the AFC North right now. Looking at the hierarchy of the division, but like I would make the argument right now that they have the worst quarterback situation in the division. I would take Fields and Wilson over Deshaun Watson right now.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you definitely have the upside in Justin Fields there over Watson, and Russ and Watson might be a bit of a wash there, but I mean, it's close. I mean, at least Russ has been able to stay healthy, right? That's the big question mark with Watson right now, is if he's going to be able to stay healthy and if he can return to that form. With Russ, can he return to that Seattle form? I don't know if either player is going to at this point, but yeah, I think I would take the Steelers upside of the quarterback room more than Deshaun Watson, the Browns right now. Yeah.
I would agree. I'm excited to see what comes from the Steelers offense, what comes from their quarterback room, and we'll see that progress. We've seen it progress throughout OTA so far. We'll be here this week for mini camp, mandatory mini camp. So we'll see everybody in action there. What have you got coming where for the people to read, and where can they find it?
Yeah, you can find all my work at yardbarker.com. I cover all things NFL. Obviously, my expertise and focus here in Pittsburgh is the Steelers. So, like Jarrett said, we'll be out at mandatory minicamp this coming week. You can catch me on Twitter at Aaron_M_Becker. I try to post a bunch of content when I'm out there at practice. And just stay tuned. It should be a fun off season and getting into the regular season here in a few months.
Yeah, cannot wait to scarf down chicken and rice in the Steelers cafeteria with you. And then, what's the weather supposed to be this week? Hopefully it's not too hot as it was a few days ago when I came back with a sunburn. So, buddy, I appreciate you hopping on with me. We'll see where this season takes us, and I will see you live and in person very, very soon.
Yep, see you soon.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, do all that fun YouTube stuff. See you guys tomorrow for more Steelers talk on Black and Gold Breakdown. Take care.